For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Political and social analyst Eusebius McKaiser joins me in Melrose North, Johannesburg, to speak about his first book, A Bantu in My Bathroom. Your book, A Bantu in My Bathroom, has an evocative and provocative title. Can you explain what sort of message you are wanting to convey through it and what response you were hoping to generate?
The title of the book actually comes from the first essay in the book, and it's based on a story. I'd come across an advert in a newspaper where a lady had advertised a room in her house that was available for lodging, but she explicitly said that she only wanted white people to apply for it. And I discussed this with her. I called her up, and of course she was flabbergasted to find out that I'm a black person who's interested, and proceeded to tell me that I've got a chip on my shoulder because the ad was not for me. So I shared the story with my radio listeners and I asked them what they thought. And to my horror, most South Africans, black and white, thought that it was fine if she wanted to live only with white people in a house. And so I put it to my radio listeners that what they're really saying is that there's something wrong with only wanting white people to live in a house that you are renting out. But in your own personal space, lo and behold, if you should wake up in the morning and on your way to the bathroom find that there's a bantu in your bathroom. So the title is a critique of people's racialism.
You have a busy life as an academic and a talk show host. Why did you feel it necessary to engage even further with society through a book?
There are very limited kind of activity you can have by way of intellectual engagement with the public if you only restrict yourself to newspapers. Newspaper columns are very small, 600 words, 800 words maximum, and it doesn't give you the space to fully air all the issues. If you want to have a debate about affirmative action, about our relationship with animals, questions about love even that have nothing to do with politics but with lifestyle and identity and the human condition, you can't get into the true detail and nitty-gritty of the big questions in life in the form of a newspaper article. So newspapers are very limiting, and so I thought a book form in which I write full essays will give the opportunity for me to engage with South Africans fully on issues that we usually write about very quickly in a newspaper.
You are particularly concerned with a society that is open and tolerant. Do you feel South Africa's tremendous gains in these areas since 1994 are at risk?
I think whether or not we have a culture of an open society, a tolerant society, a society in which we have dialogue, will depend on whether we actually practice what it means to live in an open society. And very often we shy away. One of the essays in the book is called The People versus Brett Murray, and it is an examination of how we responded to the Spear Saga. And one of the big tragedies with the Spear Saga is precisely that we missed an opportunity to practice the open society. In the open society, if you have a liberal commitment to free speech and you think that free speech is under threat because of political pressure, then you need to actually say so in the public space, articulate your defense of free speech, and be vociferous and passionate about defending free speech. And yet we saw, especially liberal South Africans who secretly thought that Brett Murray got under unfair attack, they were retreating with Brett Murray instead of standing their ground and really showing courage in the face of unnecessary political pressure. So we've got the basic ingredients for an open society, but the next challenge for South Africa is to learn how to practice the open society. And sometimes we do well, but all too often, as with the Spear debacle, where we have a chance to entrench the open society, we are found wanting.
In his foreword to your book, Professor Jonathan Janssens argues that you are out to discover not only your country, but yourself inside your richly hybrid existence. How did you respond to his analysis?
Well, I think it's absolutely spot on. Writing is deeply personal, and even when you write non-fiction, you often reveal a lot about yourself. I mean, for that matter, even when we talk about fiction, actually, if you write a science fiction book, it might seem to be all fantasy stuff, but it reveals a lot about the imagination and about the background, about the biography of the author. So as a writer, everything that you write really comes from you. It doesn't come from Mars. And so in that sense, it's absolutely spot on that even the work of an academic as a commentator, you will find evidence in there of the person's personal life. The difference with my book is I was very explicit about it. I've got lots of stories in the book about my own experiences, many that people will find shocking, some troubling, some familiar, some that they find disgusting, some that they can identify with. So I deliberately drew on it, and that was for the simple reason that stories make big issues easier to engage because stories are real, they are captivating, and then they give us a personal experiential basis to talk about race, to talk about sexuality, to talk about culture. So I use storytelling, and personal stories in particular, as a device to introduce the big debates.
You raise several debates in your book, such as black racism, violence in society, polygamy, and homosexuality. What are you hoping to achieve in raising these issues, and why do you believe they require debate?
Well, we need to get into understanding ourselves as a society. We are a very, very violent society. We're more violent than countries that have worse poverty than ourselves. So we can't even write the violence off to the fact that we have poverty, because that raises the question, why do countries on the African continent that are poorer than us have less gratuitous acts of violence? And so we need to understand what it is that drive all of these bad social facts about us. That's the reason why we need dialogue, because without dialogue, you will not get to the bottom of the problems in your society. I mean, dialogue is a no-brainer in any society. So that's the one reason. But the particular topics, the 17 essays, they touch on issues which South Africans are deeply passionate about around the braai, around the dinner table, on trips when you go off for the weekend to Kruger. These are things we talk about anyway. Our relationship with animals, stand-up comedy in South Africa. Are we a divided country? Do we have a national identity? Does it matter if we might not have a national identity? Is affirmative action morally acceptable? Is it okay for me to have racially exclusive sexual preferences? Is there something wrong with only dating black men or white men? I mean, these are questions that affect us deeply as South Africans, and I think their relevance in our lives probably speak for themselves.
And what, in your opinion, do you think causes such violence?
The violence in South Africa, as I say in that particular essay, which is probably one of my favorite essays, of miniskirts, taxi ranks, and sexist pigs. That's the title of the essay in the book. There are several factors. The historic reason, obviously, is that in a society where people have lived under a brutal police state, which is what the nature of the apartheid state was, we all, in a sense, suffer post-traumatic stress. We role modeled the use of violence on the part of the state to try and subjugate citizens. And we also role modeled using violence to resist a repressive state. We then bring that violence into the home, into our schools, into our offices. And that's why we see in 2012 road rage in South Africa. That's why you see so much violence in domestic relationships. So part of it is just the historic psychological consequences of apartheid. But then there are also contemporary factors. The fact that inequality doesn't go away breeds resentment, not poverty. Inequality. It's the gap between the haves and the have-nots. If you and I both grew up in a poor township and you've escaped to Sandton and I'm still stuck behind and I can't provide for my wife in the shack that I live in, and she reminds me of you who do so amazingly well living in the suburb, that breeds deep resentment. So there are historic factors like the brutality of the apartheid state that's still in our psychology, and then there are also contemporary factors like the fact that inequality gets worse and worse, and inequality breeds resentment. And then of course we add to the mix the fact that we raise our boys and our men to believe that you're not a real man unless you do certain things like bringing in the bacon. And when you have these traditional gender roles that are so misogynist, that place really ridiculous expectations on boys and men about what it means to be a real man, then you have all the ingredients for people to behave in an antisocial manner. So those are the causes. How do we deal with it? That's another story. But certainly the complexity of the origins of our violence is something we don't pay enough attention to.
Having engaged with this medium, can we expect yet more work from McKaiser the author?
You know what, I almost said blessed, but I have to remember that I'm agnostic at the response that I've got to the book so far. I mean, the first print run ran out within 10 days. It's technically a bestseller. It doesn't mean much in South Africa because we have a small book buying market, but for what it's worth, the book is already a bestseller. And I've been touched by that because the issues are real, but they're also complex philosophical frameworks that I've put up. And I hope that it is a success of the stylistic choices I've made to keep the language simple, plain, to use lots of stories, but to keep the argument still very tight. So I've been very surprised and happy about the incredible reception the book has got so far. But the truth is that I enjoy speaking more than I enjoy writing. I love being on radio every day, on Talk Radio 702, Monday to Friday in the evenings. I also enjoy speaking at university, giving lectures and seminars. And my goal in life is really just to contribute towards good public dialogue in South Africa. If that comes in the form of being a newspaper columnist, a TV pundit, a radio talk show host, being invited to seminars, even as a facilitator or MC, I just want to engage South Africans. So I'm not about to devote my life to books just because the first book has had a good reception. The book is just a medium through which I do my work as a political and social commentator, and I like any medium that enables me to engage South Africans. And personally, despite the fact that many people are saying nice things about the book's quality, I actually prefer speaking to people directly. If it was up to me, I'd probably be a politician. But I don't think South Africa has the space for many of us who grew up in Model C schools, who've studied overseas, to get into politics, because identity politics is such that you have to look and sound a certain way. So the short answer is my life is not going to be consumed by books, so I will continue doing what I've done. But yes, there's a second book already in the making, and it's going to be a book about the Democratic Alliance. It's going to be my first real political book. There's no politics in the first one. The next one will be out within the next year to 15 months, just before the election, and it's going to be my provocative take on what the Democratic Alliance chances are at the 2014 polls and 2019.
That was political and social analyst Eusebius McKaiser discussing his first book, A Bantu in My Bathroom.